Okay, let's get started. I'm Harry Shovlin, and I'm the chairman of this meeting, and I apologize for the weather. We usually are much more cooperative to our audience. Just want to bring to everyone's attention that the GOAT Committee of Falls Church gave up their regular Thursday night meeting time to hold this budget hearing. And I want to thank them for doing that. Remember, this meeting is being sponsored by the Citizens Forum, and Citizens Forum is it's not even an organization. It's basically a group of cooperative adults who are members of a variety of other organizations in the City of Falls Church who get together to try to bring to the attention to the general public, the subject at hand, whether it's the budget, whether it's our emergency plan, whether it's the sale of the water authority, and so forth. So I ran into Tony Jones in her office about a month ago, and she says, "You are going to have a budget hearing at the Legion," and I said, "Yes, ma'am," as a good former trooper. And so we're here tonight, and hopefully other people will arrive. I've been doing a little research on budgets, especially the state of Virginia budget, and I'm going to have an assignment for Hunter Kimball near the end of this meeting, and I'll give him an appropriate amount of time to come up with the proper answer. I'll even give him some clues, so where to look. But that'll be a little later in the meeting. At this time, I want to present Carol Lofter-Thune, who's going to be the moderator for tonight's meeting. Carol?
Thanks, Harry. Well, we're going to be a small but mighty bunch right here tonight. I know we've got all the folks here that we need to ask all the right questions, so that'll be great. So thank you all for coming, and thank you, Harry, for hosting us yet again here, and for Ken putting this together. It's a really, I will say this forum is such a great effort because it is a collaboration between Citizens for Better Cities, the GOP committee, the Democratic committee, Citizens for a Sustainable City, and we've got more folks who are joining up as well. So Ken can tell us a little bit more, perhaps at some point later today, a little more about next forums and how you can get involved. We certainly would encourage everybody to get involved from different groups, and that'd be great. So let's kick things off. Let's get started so we can all get home on this cold evening. I want to introduce Dr. Tony Jones, our superintendent here, who's going to do a presentation. And I do also want to say we have School Board Chair Justin Castillo here tonight. We're very honored to have him here as well. And let's get started.
Thank you. Yes. Does he come back there?
I can back.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure if there's anybody, well, there are a few, but not very many that haven't seen most of this before. So I will try not to go on and on too much. First of all, there are 3 handouts in the back, and some of you may not have seen these. The first one is the housing chart, and this is probably one question that we get more than any other. Where are all the children coming from? And every year we do drill down and look exactly where they are coming from by all of the different housing divisions as well as single-family homes. We also have what we call the Chavern chart, and is what is known by the school board, which shows school spending history. And this is just kind of an interesting chart if you want to look at salaries and wages and be able to follow that. The other question that we're getting a lot this year is the comparison chart for teacher salaries. And I'll have a couple slides on that, but everything that's in red is greater than 3 to 5% behind Arlington, which is our goal. And you'll notice there's a lot of big numbers in red, and that has to do with teacher salaries. I'm going to start out with just 2 quick slides on the CIP because some of you may have CIP questions tonight. And I think it's important to point out that we did have a 10-year really master plan where the school board back in 2009 to 2011 worked with a professional organization to help us talk about planning and looking forward. That's where the whole process for the grade reconfiguration came out of, where we moved 8th grade back to MEH, moved 5th grade back to TJ, and all of that movement that we've been working on over these last couple of years is what's really kind of saving us at the high school right now and relieving some pressure in that building. We also, of course, have finished Thackeray. We are in the process right now of doing all of the site work development for Mount Daniel and working on that design, and George Mason and MEHR in this master plan, and there's a lot of work that's taking place there right now with the steering committee. When you look at the steering committee work, we have so far done a test fit, and that's just looking at the GMMEH property and figuring out if, in fact, it was possible to develop part of that land and still do everything that we would need for a high school, including our athletic facilities and art facilities. And it was really just answering a question, can it be done? And we've been able to do that on these two projects. Urban Land Institute did a 2-day deep dive. Lots of experts came to town, looked at the property, and between both of those studies that we have finished, they have both said, yes, it can be done. And I just want to point out, because ULI, Urban Land Institute, put out their formal work yesterday. And I want to make sure you know that this is just conceptual. It's not like we've gone and designed a high school and that's our high school. They were really just looking, does it fit on the land? And when this came out this morning, I had 2 emails probably within 5 minutes when it went online. I didn't know you'd already designed the high school. So I just want to really reinforce that. And yes. And we do have requests for proposal right now where we're looking at, part of that is the community visioning, really getting our community together and what is it that we want and need on that land. When we look at the budget framework, and most of the people I know in this room are very aware of this, we start out with school board guidance. And this is just a reminder of what the school board said this year. They always tell me to be mindful of the community, and that is being respectful and listening to what city council is talking about, what our community asks. Stay true to the work plan, which is guided by a community visioning that we did 2 years ago. And our school board has a triennial plan. It's very focused about what we want to accomplish. And then also, only ask for what it takes to maintain great schools. We also have the 6 priorities that come out of the school board work plan. And this is really making sure that we have 21st century teaching and learning, not 20th century, 21st. Make sure that we have excellent staff, and that includes staff compensation, teacher compensation, modern and secure schools. Again, that goes back to the CIP. Readiness for learning. This is a very important work that our school board does, and it's make sure that we take care of every single child in Falls Church City. Small classes, and I really want to almost change that to say reasonable class sizes, because small means different things to different people. It's not 16. It's in kindergarten, 1st and 2nd, it's 22, and we'll have a slide on that. And every other grade level, the class size is set at 24. And then, of course, responsible fiscal management. We take that very seriously. When we look at our revenue and spending history, this is something that still we have a lot of people in the community that don't understand. We are almost solely locally funded. 82.4% of our budget is city transfer. There are very few localities in Virginia that look like this, and it has to do with the local wealth factor of our community, and there are 9 of us in Virginia that look like this. If I had Fairfax County up here, their local funding would be right around 69%. Very, very different. The rest of our funding is very minimal, coming from everything from grants, if we're able to have underspending on a current year. And then our federal funding is also very, very low because we do not have a high free and reduced ratio in Falls Church. And when you look at our spending by category, I think one of the challenges we're always faced with as a school board is if you need to cut because we're growing, where do you cut? Because the bulk of our budget is salaries and benefits. And that makes up 85.5% of our budget this year. So what you have left after you do that, the purple in the middle, the 2.7, those are things like the supplies and materials. We have furnitures and buses, which is the blue line, and then we have grants, and less than 0.5% for contingency. That's not a lot of money for an emergency. When you look at it over the last 2 years, the school board has been faced with how do we accomplish what we need to do, stick to the work plan, and make sure that we can hire the teachers that we need to hire. So you'll notice that the blue and the red, which are salary and benefits, go up. And you'll notice the green, which are insurance and utilities and all of those sorts of things that we don't really control, have gone up. And this last year we were able to get a little savings there. But you'll notice in the purple and the blue, especially last year, those are on a decrease. And those are everything else that we have when we need to make a cut. And the big blue was primarily cutting buses out of the budget, because that's really all we had to cut. When you look at our school spending and you look at it over time, the blue line is 2008 and the red line is 2015. And what you'll notice is, of course, salaries and benefits have gone up. That's hiring more staff. That's hiring more teachers for our children, for the growing enrollment. Services, that's just, again, those things we don't really control, like utilities, you can imagine since 2008 have gone up. But when you look at classroom materials, furniture, buses, technology, all the things that we use for classroom instruction, we are funded where we were in 2008. And it's pretty amazing. And we always say we're doing more with less than we really are. When you look at the growth in people versus the growth in our funding, that top line is showing you how many students. We've added 27% in our student population. We've added 15% in our staff. And down on the bottom again, just gives you another visual for all of those items that we use to run our school division beyond people. We really are a people business. When you look at our city transfer, and if you apply inflation to that, you look back at where we are at the top for this year, FY15, and then look down at the bottom and you can see the difference in funding level. And again, it is doing more with less. So what are some of the challenges? I would say this is probably one of our biggest, is increasing student enrollment. And I always like to show this trend line, because one of the questions that I will get is, well, what if the kids just don't come next year, or it just stops or slows down? But when you look at this trend line, we have been growing for 30 years. And I do not anticipate that that will change. And this year we still grew. I think it's important for people to understand that. We still grew. We just didn't have as much growth as what we had had the previous 2 years. And that's actually, we're very fortunate, and we're happy about that. We are preparing next year for an additional 100 students at least. And the one thing about this chart I point out is we do have about 500 apartments that will open next spring that's not part of this 100 students. And according when those projects finish will depend on when those students start to enroll with us. So some of the challenges that we face, inflation-driven costs that we don't control, like our retirement and our health insurance, managing aging facilities. And I always like to take this opportunity to say thank you for approving the referendum for Mount Daniel, because that is a challenging building for us. That is going to be new and wonderful. Mason is a challenge, and so we know that George Mason needs to be a focus for us. Just the HVAC alone is quoted between 6 and 12 million just to replace the HVAC. So we are really watching that building and trying to be as prudent as we can to not overinvest until we're able to really figure out the plan for that campus. Also, mentoring new staff. As you can imagine, adding 27% in staffing is a lot. And so making sure that our teachers are getting the training they need. When you look at our FCCPS staff, and I know Mr. Shevlin, this would be different probably from when you were in FCCPS, but 50% of our staff are new within the last 5 years with us. So to maintain that consistency and to make sure that our programs are solid takes a lot of training and effort. And a third of our staff are new in the last 2 years. Also maintaining small class sizes. We keep this chart every year. And again, our goal is that 22, 24 range. But the one thing that's not on this chart is if we could go back to 2007 for kindergarten or first grade, you would see sections that would say six classrooms. Now we're 9 and 10. And that's one thing the parents always point out. It's very noticeable how many more classes you have on each grade level. All of the grades that I have up here right now were the largest in our history this year. So every one of these had more students in that grade level than ever before. We also know closing the gap on teacher pay. We haven't been quiet about that. It is an issue for us. We need to be able to recruit teachers into our system, and that means beginning teachers, beginning their career, and also experienced teachers. We need to be able to retain them once they get here, and then, of course, just compete in the market, and especially on some of those positions that are specialty positions. And I added this slide at the last presentation because somebody asked this question. So really, how has that had an impact? And this school year, we started without 4 positions filled at MEH. And as of today, still, we have 1 that's not filled, and we have a substitute in that position. All 4 of those were people we found, we were ready to hire. By the time we got them through fingerprinting, they were offered a job in a neighboring district for more money. And it's very difficult for any teacher to choose to be with us, and they really want to stay here. They'll try to negotiate with us, But when it's $16,000 and we have a scale system, we have to be fair to our staff, and you have to put them where they're supposed to fairly be placed. We can't compete when it's $16,000 difference. Also, we can compete in the middle section. I just want to point out for beginning educators. That was new for us this year. We're in the first year of our plan to close the gap. We were able to do that because the gap was small. And we have lost staff to other school divisions. And we've lost some key people. And the one thing people will say, how many? And it's, well, we're small. Arlington's big, but they're not going to come and take 100 of our teachers, but they will take our very, very best. And I think it's important that we think about that. Your team leaders, people who are experienced, the huge gaps are in that 15-year range, so you're talking about some amazing teachers who have really skilled their craft. The reason we started on this journey to close teacher pay had to do with the regional salary gap. This is where we were last year. And again, we're not trying to chase Arlington. We really were almost dead last in the region on the starting salaries and maximum salaries. And in the middle section, it doesn't look that bad, but it really was because the gap was so wide between the top and where we were. And when you look at where we were comparing last year with Arlington, if you are a teacher with 15 years experience and you kind of go across on the right, you can see a bachelor's with 18 hours additional was $21,000 gap. That's huge. And there are 116 of these different steps on their scale. So at the end of our first year, this is what we saw happen, is on every single step, we were able to start to close the gap. So this very first year, we're excited about it. We feel like we've had some success. But again, $16,000 gap is still not enough to be able to compete. We need to continue to close this gap for the 4-year plan. Some of the priorities we have, 3-year outlook for programs and services. We also have a 4-year outlook for our staff compensation. This would be year number 2. We also want to stay competitive for support staff. They're competitive on the salary scale right now, and we recognize that, but we don't want to lose that either while we're trying to close the gap for teachers. In addition to that, it's important to point out that our support staff are doing more with less so that we can put teachers in the classroom. And when you look at our secretarial staff up on the top, we have 2 less staff in the division than we did in 2007. But again, as a reminder, we have almost 600 more students. That's 1,200 parents and grandparents and people to come and pick them up. And again, they're doing more with less. Down on the custodian and maintenance section, you'll notice maintenance isn't growing at all. And custodial staff, we have 2.5 less people. And if you pause and you think that we have added more than 35,000 square feet across the division, we've added 22,000 square feet at TJ, we have a brand new facility in our preschool, and we have a lot of trailers we'll have next year at Mount Daniel. And again, we're doing that with less custodial staff than we had back in 2007. This is our class size target. Again, we've talked about that. Modern and secure schools. We have completed TJ. Our Thackeray preschool is completed. The kids are in there. And I know that was one question that was sent where people didn't realize that Thackeray was open and we have kiddos in there now. And Mount Daniel is in full planning phase right now. And we have our paperwork is in, our 2232 is in at Fairfax County. And we're working on getting our first site plan approval. In Mount Daniel, going into this budget, there are some considerations that we need to be cognizant of. Food service will be very different at Mount Daniel, more of a challenge for us next year. We have to think about that in our budget. And again, right now, it's kind of working within the existing budget. We also have maintenance and custodial adjustments that we know we'll need when you have a lot of children out in trailers. It's much more difficult to clean. Weather-related expenses. When you have a lot of children outside the building, if we have a lot of snow and ice, it takes a lot more salt and just, those aspects of cleaning and clearing. And we also have a large-scale move at Mount Daniel. We need to vacate 45,000 square feet, a lot of classrooms. It takes a professional moving company to come in and do that. And we're trying to do this again inside our existing budget. We also want to continue to support and enhance our ESOL Summer Academy. These are our children who speak English as a second language, and this was a new program for us that we're real excited about. We are also, in this budget, adding an ESOL classroom assistant at George Mason. But again, any position that we're adding in this budget is not really an add. What we've done is we've moved a position from somewhere else in the school division, and we're actually not adding any staff to this budget this year at all as far as an actual new position. We also want to continue to increase translation services. When I want to point out, because I think through our partnership with BIE and also with the foundation, they work so hard on behalf of all of our kids who are in at-risk situations. And we have families who don't have internet at home. So we know in 21st century, preparing our kids, digitally, everybody should have access to the internet at home. So our foundation has worked incredibly hard to make sure that we're sending hotspots home with our children so that our families are wired who don't have the funds to be able to pay for that at home. We're one of the few school divisions in Virginia who are doing this right now. We should be very, very proud about the equity and access for our kids. When you look at the budget request, it was really different this year in that what was proposed was not just a full budget, which is normally what we would do. We wanted to be, very thoughtful again when you go back to that guidance. And so I presented this year 3 options at the request of the school board. And the 3 options range from 2.4 up to 5.9. And on all 3 of these options, these are the things that stay the same. Your fixed costs don't change, your insurance and retirement. Shifting $278,000 in those current positions that I talked about. We're not adding anything new. We're shifting people where a position may not be needed in one spot anymore, so we're going to move it to an area where it is more needed. 0 new positions, and we still are adding 100 new students. So when you look at what are the budget trade-offs, of course there has to be something that's different when you have 3 different percentages. We have in the 5.9 the 4-year salary plan, which is sticking to the plan and the work plan. On the 4.3, that would spread out to 5-year, 2.4, it would be 6 years. The reality is 6 years is not really realistic. Mr. Kimball and I would be setting the salary scales again probably in the next 2 years. When you look at restoring maintenance, we talk about all the needs we have, and especially at Mount Daniel. We're trying to get a little bit more in our maintenance because that's one of those areas we cut over the last 2 years. On that 2.4, we can't afford to do that. Our support staff, on 5.9 would include a step. In the middle section, we can do that. On that 2.4, and we might be able to do a 1 to 1.5% adjustment. On the bottom, what you see is the 5.9, which is the full work plan, does maintain all of our current staff. On the budget in the middle, we are reducing 5 positions across the school division in order to make the budget work. We would do that through natural attrition, which means someone retires, we just don't replace that position. And the 2.4 would require 10 full-time equivalent positions. And that's harder to do. We would still work very hard to do that through natural attrition, but it's not as easy as 5, and 5 can be challenging. This is a flat budget, and this is the one we were asked to look at. And I wouldn't say we were really asked. We just respectfully listened to the different dialogue that was happening from City Council and knew that this is something the community really wanted to just see what does it look like. So when you look at a flat budget, if we did the 2nd year of the 4-year salary plan, which our teachers have said is very important. We did a teacher survey and it came out strong that they think that's important. It would not allow any restoration to maintenance. We would have no support staff improvements. And again, there is, of course, no additional staff, but we would also need to reduce 20, almost 21. That is not natural attrition. Huge impacts on class sizes. That's difficult to do. And even if we changed and we said, let's do a 5-year plan for the teachers, that cuts that number down to about 18. But it is still a tremendous amount in order to meet that. So the total proposed operating budget with these 3 options, you have a city transfer, and of course, remember that's most of our funding, which is local funding. We get the other revenue from state or federal, and then that makes a total increase down at the bottom of 5.1 for the 5.9% budget. And I point that out because this is different than what you see on the city side. When we get a transfer of 5.9, doesn't mean we're increasing the total school budget 5.9, and that's because we're funded from different sources. So the actual total increase would still just be over 5%. And in the center, it would be just over 3.7, and the one on the right is 2.2, total increase. So what could change? These are all things we're watching, and I will say this week we feel better than we did last week. We're getting really good numbers out of General Assembly, but looking at cost of competing, is state revenue changing? What's our health insurance number? Those are things that get finalized about this time of the year, and we're feeling really good where those are. I also just want to point out on the top, those are all of the community engagement opportunities we've had thus far, and I think it's important to point out that we have a lot of these. Some of them are really well attended, Some of them are not, but anytime I see one or two new faces in the room, I think it's great because that's how we go out and talk to other people in the community. And we will have several more of these sessions down on the bottom where we actually start to join with the city and have some city town halls on Saturday mornings and lots of opportunity to get engaged and ask questions. And that is it. And Mr. Castillo?
Thank you, Dr. Jones. Thank you all for braving the cold tonight. I had a hard time getting over here because it was so cold. I would have ridden my bike, but thought the better of it tonight. Discretion being the better part of valor. I noticed we have many people from the community have come out. I'd like to recognize Phil Duncan, Mary Beth Conley from City Council, my colleagues Kieran Sharp and Susan Carney. Thank you so much. And thank you all for coming out here. I don't have a presentation, and I don't have much to add beyond what Dr. Jones has said. Rather interested in hearing what your thoughts are. You also braved the cold, so I want you to be able to ask your questions. I just would talk about a couple of issues. The first being, and since I'm a lawyer, I suppose I'm taking an overly lawyerly view of things, but one of the things that's important to remember is our job as the school board is stated in the Constitution. We have an obligation to provide high-quality, free education for all school-age kids. And that's what we're trying to do. That's our goal here. At the same time, we're members of this community. We understand that a growing school division means growing pains for everybody in the city, and we get that, and we're trying to balance this. I think the other thing is this dichotomy between the city and the schools is something I'm really working to get past, because there are no schools without the city, and there won't be a city as we know it without the schools. So we're all in this together, and I'm confident, given the history of this city, that we've faced these challenges before, and we can do it again. One of the things that we've been working on is trying to get additional community input, and that's why I'm glad you all are here today, and have as much of a thorough discussion of things as possible. We sent out a survey recently to teachers, and a few things emerged that were very valuable. Comments were very illuminating. One of the things that came through repeatedly in teacher comments was the value of small schools and the supportiveness of the environment. That came through again and again, and I think that's something really essential to what we have here. If we were part of another jurisdiction, a lot would be lost, and I think some of that would be the size and the intimacy. Parents can have meetings with the superintendent. That's not the normal state of affairs if you've got tens of thousands of kids in your division. And the teachers are a core strength of our system. It's the size, but it's also the fact that what draws teachers here is the supportive nature. We have a lot of teachers who come here, go to another jurisdiction, and then come back. And even though we're bigger than we used to be, we're a lot smaller than a lot of other places as well. And so we want to keep our teachers. We want to attract teachers, and we want to retain them. Turns out attracting teachers and retaining them entail two different sets of incentives and qualities, and so we need to balance that. The other thing that I think we need to realize is, yes, enrollment is growing. You saw that chart earlier. One of the things to keep in mind is, to some extent, this is back to the future, because in 1965, the enrollment in Falls Church was about 2,200 kids.
Thank you for saying.
In 1960, well before I was born, 40% of the population of Falls Church was age 19 and under. There followed a time where, as I looked through census data, there was a huge exodus to the suburbs. The only jurisdictions from the 60s into the 70s that lost population were Alexandria, Arlington County, and Falls Church. Now we've seen a return to a more urban focus. DC is resurgent. There's I think a new view of what people are looking for in quality of life, and I think Falls Church is well positioned to, I wouldn't say profit from it, but benefit from it and have our citizens benefit. So there is a lot of change, that notwithstanding. And one of the things that we're all going to be working through is coming to terms with that change, managing that change, and shaping that change. Again, the schools will be part of that, but there are a lot of other issues, and they're all very tightly connected. And I guess the last thing that I would say is we're really interested in knowing what people are looking for in the schools, what matters to the schools. Hear a lot about metrics these days. Metrics are valuable. A lot of things that can be measured are important, but not everything that's important can be measured. There are intangibles, and I think Falls Church has a lot of intangibles. You know, the civic values, the participation. A lot of these things don't have a dollar value, you can't test for them, and they don't have an immediate payoff, but I think they're valuable, and I think that's why we're here. So with that, I'll shut up and start fielding questions. Dr. Jones, you want to join me up here? And actually, I'll turn it over to you, Carol, and you can run this shit.
Sure thing, sure thing. Well, I'm not going to answer the questions, but that's okay. So let's start this off. I've got some questions that were sent in. You know, this is like a quiz game show or something, right? Folks have sent their questions in, but let's start off with you all. I'm sure you now, especially having seen this presentation, many of you are old hands at this. I will say we do have just a few ground rules tonight. And those ground rules are that to be fair to everybody, we'd like you to take no longer than 2 minutes for your question and statement. And we'd also like you to wait until everyone has had a chance to ask a question or make a statement before asking a second question or seeking recognition a second time. So the only reason we're doing that is not to cut anybody off, but just so that we have only an hour, and we know we could be here actually probably discussing all of this many more hours, so we want to make sure, that's right, we want to make sure that everyone here has an opportunity, as well as a few of the questions from our listeners at home. So if you all will kick it off, who's got a question? Okay, I'm going to kick it off then. So, I mean, you have to have a fast hand here, okay? You were talking about some key questions here, and I would say the questions that were written in were about primarily population growth in the students, class sizes, teacher pay, and competitiveness. So we're going to start off with 2 questions that I think are kind of really hit at sort of the core of this. One is a comment, actually. The comment was, the city council and school board seem to be in competition for tax dollars. Doesn't city council understand that kids in schools are our city's primary product? We don't manufacture cars or computers. We produce college-ready kids who will make us proud years from now. So, how much do we pay teachers compared to Arlington and Fairfax? The slides were up there, but they went by pretty fast, so maybe if you could give us an average. And you did talk about the fact that we're losing teachers. So besides pay, how are you all planning to attract and retain good teachers?
Well, on the pay question, when you're talking about teacher salary scales, that one is actually a little bit more difficult because it depends where you are on the scale, how you would compare it to Arlington or Fairfax. So if you're at the beginning of our scale, we're fairly competitive with Arlington. If you're at the top end of our scale and you've been with us for 21 years or longer, we're very competitive. If you're in that middle range, and especially around kind of that 15-year mark, the gap is big. And again, I did have that chart for you tonight so you can actually see exactly what those are. Fairfax County is probably in more of a challenging situation than we are in that, and if you listen to their budget, they are really trying hard to make the first step this year to close their gap, and their gap is wider than ours. So they're having exactly the same challenge, just more on a greater scale. We don't lose, very, very seldom would we have anybody, unless it was just because they want to teach next to their house, would we lose someone to Fairfax County, because they do usually have to give up a little bit of pay to do that. And the second part of that question was?
Besides pay, how can we attract and retain good teachers?
And I think part of that, how do we attract and retain teachers? Of course, pay is one factor, but I think Justin hit on that before when we were even surveying our staff this week and in their comments. They like that we have reasonable class sizes. They like that in our high school classes that we might have 24 students, we don't have 34 or 35 or 36 with a teacher trying to use acid in chemistry. That's a challenge. That's something that's important to our teachers. We also have a 21st century mentality, and our technology integration is something that progressive young teachers, if you ask Mr. Bird, he'll tell you they want it. They're looking for school districts that offer the tools they need to be a 21st century teacher. And then we also make sure that we give them the time that they need for planning, for professional development, and just support their needs as a teacher. Do you have anything else, Mr. Steele? Okay.
So kind of a follow-up question here. I know we heard about the service positions, but in terms of an average for non-teaching positions, including administration, can you kind of give us a picture of how that compares?
And we actually, 2 work sessions ago, we did have the salary scales for all of our support and also for our administration. And our administrative team is fairly comparable. We have some areas where, especially a high school principal would be one, where the gap is too wide, and we know that we're going to have to look at that. On our support salary scales, which means custodian, maintenance, bus drivers, we have, over the last couple of years, worked to close some of those. So last year we focused on our health aides, who were incredibly far behind everybody in the region. So they're in a good place. We also really worked on our bus drivers because we were having trouble recruiting bus drivers, and we reset that scale last year. So where those weak points are, we are working on those.
Great. Instead of popping up and down.
I have a question or
Yeah.
statement or
Yes.
whatever, taking away from your written things. Justin, I'm so glad that you mentioned history, because people kind of think that we haven't been big or bigger in the past. And in 1969, when I started teaching at TJ, we had about 2,300 kids, K through 12, 3 elementary schools, and George Mason Junior Senior High School. We've got quite a few lifers in here, actually, and you can raise your hand as a lifer, kind of qualify. But it's so, you see these things, but we went down to a population of 1,300 with the building, tearing down Tyler Garden, and the building of Cherry Hill and Winter Hill. Then plus the fact a lot of the people who started the school system had no kids. So, we have been growing, and it's the natural growth when you have this turnover. But when you look at the statistics and everything, people still keep saying, it's all in the new areas, but, new mixed use. But 183 kids out of those new ones. And if you look at everything else, it's pretty darn huge. So you've got, total multi-use 976, and the rest with single family 1480. So, we still have that growth, but it's not, I'm sensitive to the fact that people think we're just growing leaps and bounds for no reason. But we have been pretty, just steadily coming. We used to recruit kindergartners. I mean, geez.
Yes.
Tuition kids all over the place.
Yep.
Yes. Follow-up
And,
question?
Terry's gonna follow.
Here.
Let her go.
Me?
Allison?
Yeah, I
It's
have-
Allison, right?
Yeah,
Hi, Allison.
Allison, hi.
And if anybody would like the mic, I don't want you to have to yell here, so you're welcome to come up.
I
or-
think everybody can hear.
Great.
My question is, I just don't understand the process to understand how you can vote on a budget that we haven't seen the entire budget. Dr. Jones has presented a PowerPoint. And I asked somebody who has been watching these for a while and said, well, these are, what you're presenting is what you're changing. So inferring the rest of it stayed the same. But then I looked at the fiscal year 15 budget, and every line is changed, up 15%, or there's a percentage delta for every single line. So it seems to me that we would start with the whole entire budget. So I don't feel like necessarily that whether you've seen that, or you should be, it seems to me you should be working from the entire budget and everything's on the table. And so maybe there's something you could cut, and because I'm not really comfortable with voting on a PowerPoint presentation like you see the whole budget.
Well, I think the threshold matter is that we wanted to approach this as mindfully as possible and to use an analogy, you know, before you do the detailed blueprints or before you even start building, you need to have a sense of what you're going to be building. And we've been struggling with what level of, you know, what would the various scenarios look like. I think to start with something of that nature, without really having decided the threshold question of where are we headed this particular budget year, would not be particularly efficient. So what we're doing is we're understanding what the trajectory is for the division this year, conceptually, at which time then we can get to the more detailed stage in the process. Dr. Jones, I don't know if you want to say anything more about that, but you know, this is not just something where you come out of the gates in mid-January saying, okay, here's the budget, let's just start tearing it apart line by line. That's not the way that I think is the most efficient way to get to it. With respect to cutting things, you know, I think we're looking at priorities, we're looking at improving areas where we can improve. You know, there was an efficiency study done recently that showed on the operations side, the school is very efficient. I think if you look at the fact that since fiscal year 2007, the real amount of dollars expended per students has dropped by about 17%. We're working very hard to be as efficient as possible while also maintaining our obligations to offer high quality education to school-age kids. So that in a nutshell is how we're going about
So you
about
will
this.
get to a place, before you vote, you'll get to a place where you'll actually see a spreadsheet and you'll see costs of line by line, you'll see program costs. I mean, you're gonna.
Dr. Jones, why don't you talk about what's your next steps?
Part of it is too, when you look at the budget from 14 to 15, or if you look at the two that are online, there is a 15 that is superintendent's proposed, and then there was what the school board put forward. There are always differences between those two budgets because the school board makes changes after I would normally present the whole budget book. The next step for us, and for me as a school superintendent, when the budget ranges from $0 to $2 million, and that's what we've been talking about these last couple of weeks, Mr. Kimball and I can't put a budget together until we know where those cuts come from. That's what we're doing right now. We're actually in the process of putting that together, and then the school board will look at everything line by line, just like they do every single year. But this budget is unique in that we didn't add anything to it. So if you look at FY15, the only thing that's going to happen is going to be any changes that are within that FY15. We're not adding staff. So that's where we are right now in the process, and that was a request of the school board. And I think it was a good request because I could have just come out and presented a budget, but we felt that in the community there was a lot of discussion about what does zero look like. So I could have presented a zero budget, but I think the school board was very wise in that if I came out and said we're going to cut 20 staff, I think everybody would have been very unsettling, and that we needed to go through the process this year.
So before you vote, the 16 proposed budget line by line will be available, so people will be able to see what is it, you know, will we be able to see the program costs? I mean, because it's all rolled up, so what if
Our plan right now, Ms. Kuchma, is to prepare a draft document for the board to vote on. We will not have a final budget until the board votes on it, and the board can and has in the past actually made changes the very night of the meeting that they voted on. So to put something written in stone and to presuppose the actions of the school board the night that they vote on the budget, staff cannot do that, and because that's not our role.
Our budget after the school board has their school board proposed budget, it goes to city council. And last year when it went to city council, we ended up having to come back and cut and work on it again, over $100,000. So we don't get to that point until May.
So that was actually one of our questions, Allison, that we had as well from folks at home, which was, would the schools provide their budget in an Excel format for those folks who want to take a more detailed look? And it sounds like the answer is at the appropriate time, yes. So moving along, are there other questions right now from the audience? Yes, Aaron.
Hey, I have two questions. First question is for Dr. Jones. What monetary rewards has the City of Falls Church received from the Department of Education for running a tight ship, for producing quality graduates, and basically running a first-class educational system? What have been our monetary rewards from the Department of Education for doing that?
Well, they barely fund us on a daily basis, so they don't tend to really give us monetary rewards. And most of our even local tax dollars, as you know, go to fund other school divisions in Virginia.
And the second question, this is for Mr. Kimball. Mr. Kimball, can you explain to the group here what the ability to pay index is that the state of Virginia uses in determining how little money we receive?
Get off my coat.
Getting serious.
Getting warm in here.
3 sentences.
In terms of the state sending state funding to localities to fund education, they do look at an index, what they call the local composite index, which looks at local wealth, the ability of localities, of each individual locality, be they a city or a county, to raise money on their own. And there are 3 components that get factored in: the value of real estate, I think adjusted gross income, and retail sales, and those are factored in along with population statistics to determine how much of the state calculated education costs will be funded by the state. As an aside, I will also mention that the state calculated education costs are not the actual education costs for any locality in Virginia. They are much, much lower. They do not recognize all the teaching positions that we have, that Fairfax has, that Lee County has, that Norfolk City has. They don't recognize them, they don't fund them all. They only fund those positions, or rather I should say they only fund a portion of the positions that they recognize through their standard of quality funding model. Under the state funding model, class sizes in our school divisions would be, in all school divisions, would be much, much higher. They would be in the 30 to 40 student per class range if we only staffed at the state model. Falls Church is, as Dr. Jones says, one of 9 localities that is at the max. We have a local composite index of 80%, and that means of the money that the state calculates that we need to run our school division based on their formula, Falls Church needs to come up with 80% of those funds. The state will send us 20% of those funds. What we have in reality is kind of like Dr. Jones's chart in terms of the teachers, where you have a big circle and then a smaller circle and a smaller circle. The larger circle being the actual costs of running our school system, okay? Then, inside that circle, there are the costs that the state will recognize as part of its formula. The rest of this does not take it into account. And of that smaller circle, then, you take 20% of that, and that's how much the state funds. And it actually comes out between the state revenue that is calculated through the standards of quality plus the sales tax that we get, and they're almost equal. The state sends us about 4% based on the SOQ, and we get about another 4% from the sales tax. That's a total of 8%.
And actually, just to follow up with a little more information, this is from Fairfax County, a recent summary of their budget that Mr. Sharp was actually kind enough to send. And this is about Fairfax County, so again, their situation is not nearly as extreme as ours, but in Fairfax County, local funds account for 70%. And then it has something here, other Virginia school divisions. I don't know if that's the average across other Virginia school divisions or not, but anybody want to guess what the number is for that? It's 46%. State funding for Fairfax County is 23.2%. For other Virginia school divisions, 45%. So it's really a tremendous gap, and I think we lose it's hard for us to appreciate the magnitude of that. And then federal aid for Fairfax County, 1.7. Other Virginia federal aid is 8.5%. So I think that sort of gives a little more context to our situation.
Follow up.
Okay. We're going to try to get around to everybody.
Hunter did a beautiful job. You really explained to me something. I did not understand that index when I looked it up online, and just Google Department of Education, State of Virginia, and you get all this information that doesn't make much sense, but you know, that they seem to think it does. What's important is the city of Richmond. 45% is supplied by the local community. Bath County, 28%. Buchanan County, better known as Buchanan County, is I believe that was in the 28% range. And Bath County, by the way, has 605 students. They never heard of the word merger. Okay, I'm from Pennsylvania, and in the 1960. The small school districts were forced to join together to come up with a fiscally responsible school district, and so basically the problems we're having with the budget in the city of Falls Church, and by the way, this is my 43rd school budget. There's never been a good time, okay, in those 43 years, and Lindy has more on me than that, but the problem. Our local problem is a state problem, okay? It's that formula problem. Northern Virginia is the cash cow for the rest of the state, and we need to get our act together legislatively to basically fight for more money. And where's the fight? I mean, we need to get Marcus Simon in here, and we need to get Sasslaw and say, get working on it, because it's absolutely crazy the way it's now set up. Stop.
Take the microphone.
That's right.
I warn you.
So that's a question I had from the viewers at home, which was, can we merge with Fairfax and then sell the land that George Mason and Mary Ellen Henderson sit on to get more tax revenue and eliminate the school budget problem? So that's the we could be here till next February question. But do you all have a comment?
I think that comes to the existential question of why we have Falls Church. The outsourcing question, if you look at the formulas that Mr. Kimball talked about, if we were to ask Fairfax County to run our schools, and I don't know if they would say yes, and I'm not sure what it would take to make them say yes, if you look at those factors, there would be no savings. If you look at the pay differentials, we've thought about asking the teachers what they would think about a merger with Fairfax County or outsourcing to them, and decided that was probably not a good question, and probably not one that we need to ask. But you know, that question basically says, why don't we just fold up shop, liquidate the city, and move on? Because we've struggled with finding a way to articulate what these stakes would be, because it's hard to imagine. Would you have a situation, you know, Fairfax City has an arrangement with Fairfax County, but that turns in part on substantial extra space in their high school, which allows them to do some rentals, to do some offsets that we wouldn't be able to do. So would you have a situation where everybody on this side of Broad Street would go to Jeb Stewart, and everybody on the other side would go to Marshall? I don't know, but we would be handing the keys to Fairfax County, and they would be educating our kids on their terms, not on ours. We could do that, but I think that basically would sort of negate Falls Church as we know it. So the finances don't work, and I think the philosophy works even worse. And you know, the history of Falls Church over the last 6 decades has been, do we do this ourselves, or do we go with Fairfax? Or, you know, some people say Arlington. I don't see cost. If there are no cost savings with Fairfax, there certainly aren't going to be cost savings with Arlington. So I think the answer to that question is really that's the nightmare scenario. So Dr. Jones, I don't know if you want to say anything else.
I mean, the only thing I would add, I think you're talking about kind of the whole aesthetics of the city, but I think we have drilled down to actually look at the numbers, and I did share this with the school board about 2 work sessions ago, where I worked very closely with the Fairfax City superintendent so that I would understand, because they have a contract that's online, but you can't really figure out what's happening by the contract. You also can't really figure out where their budget lies, because the budget that Fairfax City puts together doesn't include any of those pieces like their special education funding. And if you look at our budget, that's a tremendous amount of our budget. That all goes to Fairfax County. So even when you look at their budget online, it just doesn't make sense. And when Mr. Kimball and I spent a lot of time running the numbers, there's absolutely no cost savings. Even if we went with their model, having no space to rent to Fairfax County. So we did do due diligence, and I think that was an important thing for us to do.
Well, thank you, now that we've gotten that out of the way. Jerry, you have a question?
Yeah, I'd like to ask Tony, I read someplace that you were accused of cherry-picking data to show we are unique. Could you tell me about that?
Oh, sure. Well, first of all, that article, I actually hadn't seen it until somebody forwarded it to me. It did go to all of our staff. But I don't know how you cherry pick an SAT score. I don't run the college board. I wish I did. That'd be great. But what I had shared at a school board meeting was our SAT score. And it's that was actually not even a document that we put together. The Washington Area Board of Education puts that document together every year, and we had several pages of that document that the school board were reviewing. So absolutely we don't cherry pick, but we do present our results, and we're very proud about the work that our staff and our kids do every single year.
And I think it's important with this question to understand that the success of the schools, depending on your perception of that, is not fixed. There's no capital of success that rolls over to next year. Every year we have to do it again. There's a new crop of students with a new challenge. And the measure of our success should be the degree to which we help every student meet his or her potential. Are scores part of that? Sure. What are your scores in art? Should we not teach art because there are no scores for it? Of course not. I think we're educating kids. We're not running a business, and I think whatever statistics we have will be great and should guide us. But at the same time, I think the success of every student here is important to us. We can talk a little bit more about things like ESOL and special ed and what we're doing there, because could we be doing better for some of those kids? Absolutely. Are we trying to do that? Yes, we are. And so, again, there's no complacency. Last year's scores, whatever they are, were last year's scores, and there will be scores again this year. Should we be running SAT prep classes for our kids so that the scores go higher? I'm not sure that's what we're about. I think to the extent kids are doing well, it's because we're educating them well, and if they test well, so be it. But.
Great. Yes. And I should have asked you all to each identify yourself. I'm sorry, I know a few of you, so my apologies.
My name is Tom Johnson.
Great.
I just have a couple questions about numbers, and I apologize if I missed them in the blizzard of numbers that was up there. But small class sizes was a big reason that we moved here about 5.5 years ago. And we're refugees from the Fairfax County schools, and proud of it. So at the time, 2 of my kids were in 5th and 6th grade classes of around 35 kids each. So where are things now? We saw the numbers here, but just wonder in Arlington, Fairfax, where are things in terms of average class sizes? And the other question was expenditure per pupil. It seems my vague recollection 4 or 5 years ago is that we were number 1, or I thought we were number 1, and then we fell behind Arlington by a substantial amount, but we're still substantially ahead of Fairfax and everybody else. Where are we now in expenditure per pupil?
And can I just add one more sort of context to that, which is that maybe it'd be interesting to hear you say, you mentioned that cutting 20 FTEs would have a significant impact on where we are right now. Maybe if you could kind of wrap that in as well.
First of all, on the funding where we fall, Alexandria and Falls Church City are pretty similar from year to year. Arlington funds about $2,000 more per student than we do. Fairfax County is probably, on average, at least 2 behind where we are. And what you find is that the class sizes between Falls Church City and Arlington are very similar, very similar. Fairfax County has had a very difficult time maintaining their class sizes. In their high schools, for instance, a lot of their classes have 30. And I actually was sharing with some of my senior staff the other day, because I wouldn't have believed it if I didn't see it, where my husband teaches in Fairfax County, so I know he has 30 in his class. But he has a colleague that teaches physics that has 47. And in Falls Church City, that just would never, our parents would not allow that to happen. So it's a very different model in Fairfax, and I don't think that they're happy with it either. They would like to have, smaller class sizes. It's just where they are, but very different world in Fairfax County than it is in Falls Church or Arlington, and for Alexandria for that matter.
Any impact?
Oh, the impact, if we cut 20 teachers, we do have a chart. I don't know if we ran all the way out to the 20. Class sizes, the class size would go out the window if we start cutting 20 staff. We would look more like Fairfax County than we would Falls Church City.
So kind of in that same vein, some of the questions we had were along the lines of that student population growth, and there was one or two comments. I seem to have read that the city doesn't budget for increased student population based on the new rental units coming online. We always seem to be surprised by all the new students right after a new apartment building goes up. And the second comment was, with McMansions going up all over, common sense would suggest that when we go from one house with an older couple to 2 McMansions with 4 or 5 bedrooms each, there will be more kids in the schools. So how do the schools project for student population growth, especially that population growth coming from rental units and condos? Where is that new growth coming from? And can you also speak to where you mentioned the 500 apartments coming? I'm assuming that's at Northgate and your Tenor Hill? Rush, okay. How many students are projected from those projects?
First of all, we have 2 projections that we use. One of them is Weldon Cooper, and that's your natural growth rate and what we expect to happen in the school division. The second component we look at is the economic development component, and I work incredibly close with Mr. Shields and his staff and Mr. Kimball and Mr. LeCondre for us to really go in and look at on every new development that's coming in, how many 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms are going to be in that complex. We have, and if you look on the housing chart that you'll see where it actually has the ratio out on the right-hand side. That's where we're drilling down to say how many students are coming from what type of complex. And we're trying to be as thorough as we can to even look at factors like, okay, if there is a swimming pool or a park close by, is that more of a family-friendly environment versus another setting? Do we get more students from apartments than we do condos? And we know that yes, we do. So every new development that comes online, we're running those numbers together jointly with the Economic Development Office in the city and the schools. We look at every unit that will go into that development and then calculate how many students will come from those new developments. The tricky part is we're really new at this in Falls Church. We don't have 15 developments to really look at. Pearson Square was something I think that caught the city off guard, but that's because it was supposed to be a condo. And then it was during the difficult financial times, it switched to an apartment complex, and it has continued to grow each year. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what's going to happen in these new developments coming online, so we're really paying attention. Northgate is open. The projection, low projection, was right around 20-ish. That's exactly where we came in at 22. So we're hoping on Lincoln and Rushmark, which are the one on Broad Street and then the one on Maple Street. Both of those new developments will open next spring. We are, if you put those 2 together, it's either going to be 60, 100, or about 150. That's the low, the middle, and the high based on exactly how many 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, and 3 bedrooms are there and the ratios. No, 3 bedrooms, no. Yeah, 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms. Thanks, Lindy. Yeah, and they are, and it'll be interesting to see in a smaller 2 bedroom.
All smaller units.
Yeah. So we're watching all of that, but we're doing that jointly with the city, and I think that we're really trying hard to be on top of that. But it's very difficult to do, and I wish I could say that we knew exactly how many kids we were going to get, but again, this is new for the city. And we actually, the interesting thing I would share is Arlington was having more difficulty than we were, and we've only done a few, and so we've shared how we were drilling down on what our housing chart looks like, and they've actually modeled that, and so has Fairfax City, who is also having the same difficulty. So we're proud of the work that we're doing.
Great. Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah, hi, I'm Dave Kutchma, and I just had a couple points. And as you talked about Fairfax County and maybe Arlington, about having so many kids in their class, I just hope that we're selling that to our teachers, that you work in a 4 or 5 school system. So if you're a high school teacher, you go to one high school. You're a middle school teacher, you got it. You know where you're going to be. We're not going to change. You go to Fairfax County, you could be in Lorton, you could be in, I don't know, next to Loudoun County. So I think there's value in that. I don't know how to say it, but something to consider as we seem to be rushing to pay our teachers to the highest, to pay them the most. And they got something really nice here. So just so we convey that, and that to me, there would be value in that. You know, you can be a small fish in a big pond, or you can be a big fish in a small pond. So what does that mean? And I think we need to look at that maybe across the board. The other thing was that and I do see there's new houses everywhere. You know, I'm working on Tinner Hill, and these are 1,200 square foot apartments, 2 bedrooms. They're big, so I think we're going to get more kids out of those. That as we're all for investing in our children, and we've rolled out the personalized learning with, giving, people Mac Airs, that I think that should maybe be shared by the people that are now using our school system. We've got a, whatever, $2 million IT budget. We have 1,000 of these. It's, what is it? Is it a $500 charge per student? We're providing you with a computer, and we're providing you with IT services, and it's so someone who doesn't have a child in the system, or for someone's that a retiree that's here, they're not having to foot that bill. And because we're attracting more kids, and we've set up this program, when 1,000 more kids come online and we have 1,000 more computers to buy, why not? I don't know how you do it, but just maybe share that burden with those that receive the benefit of it, and then it may, it seems to me it might be a rational thing. And finally, I was watching a school board budget meeting, and the bus issue came up that's in your budget, that we have to buy a new $90,000 bus. It seems that every year that we get in the city forfeitures from, it's from the drug bust, and I think I was happened to watch one meeting where they were spending that money, and it was, well, our little city here doesn't have it doesn't have a situation van, so let's buy a situation van for $110K. I'm making that number up, and we need the blood dye test kit. That's $15,000. But I think it was over $250,000 that came to the city in forfeitures. And I do see that we are replacing police cruisers annually, but just making sure that if there is a need for, say, a bus, that the city council knows about it, that maybe they could, in the forfeiture money budget, maybe a new police cruiser, and save the money in the city's budget for the bus. So just happened to see it, and I was kind of like, how are they going to spend that money? And it wasn't saved. It got spent. So that's what I would say.
So Justin, Tony, there were a couple of pieces there. Would you like to comment, respond?
Well, I do. With respect to forfeiture money, there's been a lot of publicity about that lately. The Justice Department has taken some steps, and I'm not sure how much more the forfeiture program, as we've known it, is going to continue. But with respect to the larger issue of vehicle replacement, one of the things that we've been talking about is getting some kind of sinking funds, some vehicle replacement fund going with the city council, so that we could have a smoother path forward for this, because they come pretty steadily. There are a lot of good reasons why having a sort of smoother path forward would be a good thing to do for longer term planning. And so I hope the city council will engage on that and have some discussions. I look forward to doing that if at all possible. So, yeah, and with respect to those kind of windfall monies, I do think spending something for its own sake is obviously not something we should do. I think we needed those items, but I just well, and I think at the end of the day, we do have to be very careful of what we're doing and why we're doing it. I think we've had some discussions about trying to do some multi-year planning for budgets, have better communication about, where the needs are projected to be. Because, Mr. Shields last week at MEH was discussing how over the next few years, revenues will be growing at about a percentage point slower than projected expenditures. That's a problematic gap. Part of our discussion in this city, again, if you accept my premise that no schools without the city and no city without the schools, we're going to have to address that. We're going to have to face that squarely. And we're going to have a plan and a path forward so that we can meet our needs within the confines of what seems to be a potential gap between revenue growth and expenditure growth.
Carol, can I put my planning commission hat on
Yes.
for a minute? As far as school bus budgeting, those cannot be in the CIP anymore because you can't guarantee that they're going to last 10 years. And so you can only debt service things that are going to last 10 years. So that's going to have to come out of operating budget. We used to be able to combine all those things and debt service them. But due to the new accounting regulations, we can't do that anymore. And the other thing that's going to be paid outside of debt service is the reconditioning of the football field and the track. That's coming out of water funds because we cannot guarantee that it's going to be there for 10 years. But it's desperate that we get it done after the 2015 football season, so it'll be ready for Parks and Recs next time. So there's been some differences in what we can debt service and what we can't.
Hi, Mr. Kuchma, Hunter Kimball, and thank you very much for your ideas in terms of ways to offset our demands on city transfer to the schools. Many of those things have been thought of, and I'll tell you, school boards are extremely restricted by the Code of Virginia and the Constitution of Virginia in terms of those things for which we can charge, given, as Mr. Castillo had mentioned, that the Constitution speaks to free and appropriate education to all students. In terms of the computers, I have, and I know Dr. Jones has as well, received a number of questions from community members throughout the fall, and they sort of have waned off now, just in terms of the computers and, gee, my kid goes to private school, can I have one of those free computers that you're, handing out? And I think it's important for folks to understand, and look, I'm the money guy in the school division, and even I understand this, is that the laptop computers that are being used at the high school and and at the middle school, they are an integral part of the curriculum and the instructional program here, to the point that they're used every day in the classroom as part of the lesson plans, and we are quickly moving to a point where our textbooks will actually be virtual textbooks, and we won't be handing kids textbooks anymore. That the textbooks actually can be pulled up on the computers. And I'll tell you, in past years, school divisions in very tight fiscal times and all across the Commonwealth have tried things like charging textbook fees. And those were legal for a while until the General Assembly stepped in and said, thou shalt not charge for textbooks. And we have to be very, very careful. I'll tell you right now what we do charge for. Extracurricular activities like sports athletics, there is a fee associated with that. For some of the students at the high school who drive, we do charge a parking fee, which does help defray some costs in the operating budget. Not huge, but it is something. And we have looked at other fees and things like that, but we have to be very careful to make sure that we stay within the law of Virginia.
And then, one other thing, I was trying to think creatively about buses. I think somebody mentioned this earlier. The problems that we have in Falls Church are the problems of growth and success. There are a lot of other school districts that are contracting. I said to Dr. Jones, are there schools somewhere in Virginia that are divesting themselves of school buses? Should we look for, is there a used school bus somewhere we could get? You'd obviously want to kick the tires and look under the hood, but we're trying on that. I think the long-term I think the life of the school buses is pretty stable. We haven't had too many surprises, but we're trying. So.
Well, great. So other questions? I want to make sure you all here have questions. We get those answered. Yes, Barry.
So I'll make a statement and ask a question. As one who sometimes wakes up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat because I've had a dream that I didn't actually graduate from George Mason.
We haven't been here to talk to you about this.
Yeah, and I'm so glad those records have been lost.
Oh, we got them.
Okay. Well, we used to pay Hunter to take our tests for us. So he was a smart guy. I don't think Tom ever graduated, quite frankly.
Oh, these lifers.
But Harry hit the nail on the head with the way that we operate in the state of Virginia. I mean, we need to be the state of Northern Virginia. And I said this a couple years ago in one of these meetings. For every dollar we send down there, we get 25 cents back. And then we're also stuck with this penalty, whatever you want to call it. And that's the root of our real problems. Yeah, we might be a rich community, but not everybody is rich. And we are a small community, so that's really the heart of our problems. And I don't know, Hunter, how much does unfunded mandates from the state of Virginia cost us every year? I mean, I know you
just have to get your billions back.
Barry, I can tell you this. We have at a number of times at various points tried to sit down and quantify exactly what the unfunded mandates cost. It is significant, whether it's keeping EpiPens in every classroom and bus, but it also gets into a lot of gray areas about what in fact is a state mandate. After you and Mr. Shovlin brought up the issue of the challenge of the funding formula and the mechanics, just a little bit of history, and that when the current funding formula was put into place, and that was in the early 70s, I think it was.
It's been a long time.
Yeah, it was Bill Lemon and Dorothy McDermott down at General Assembly, two very good folks, and you know.
JOUR.
Well, this was pre-JOUR, but to that point, at some point, I guess the General Assembly, looked at the budget and thought all these education costs are getting out of hand. So what's going on here? And what they found out was that the funding formula that was in place looked at the average teacher salary across the entire Commonwealth. Well, guess what? The fact that Arlington and Falls Church and Fairfax and Alexandria had, in fact, to pay more, higher teacher salaries because of regional competitiveness issues. It was determined that, well, you know what, we're weighting the average salary up too high. So we got to fix this average. That we can't use the average salary anymore. So what they did is they came up with this weighted average, which basically threw out the outliers for all intents and purposes. So if you're, so the Northern Virginia's average teacher salaries really weren't getting factored in at all. And so the thing that we were doing that was actually benefiting us, paying our teachers more competitive salary, that then in turn would get factored into the formula and drive more money here. They're like, oh, you can't have that. They changed the formula. Okay, to give us less money. Okay, then our legislators did do something at that point. They put in what they call this cost of competing adjustment, which says, in certain school divisions, certain regions, we will give you, X percent more of the 20% that we give you right now, in recognition of the fact that it does cost more to hire and retain teachers in these certain parts of the Commonwealth. Makes a whole lot of sense. Except that every year or two, there is always legislation introduced to eliminate the cost of competing. Get rid of that, because the rest of the state's mad at us because we're sucking up all the money. And in fact, I have seen the cost of competing percentage drop over the years. I'm pleased that it hasn't gone away entirely, but it seems like every time that we come up with a way to basically equal things out a little bit and get our fair share, there seems to be a very strong force on the other end, either undoing or changing the rules, or just trying to take the money back away from us.
Aren't school buses mandated by the state of Virginia?
School bus, actually, transportation is mandated for special needs students.
For special needs?
Yes. We would not be, and I believe it would also be mandated in certain areas where the distances are extreme. It would not apply to us. Theoretically, you know, if we we didn't bus the majority of our students, there would be no penalty. We wouldn't receive certain state revenue for transportation, but it's not a whole lot of money.
Well, I have to say, working for several volunteer organizations in the city, the students that come out and help are just such a tremendous asset. And we would talk to these students, to deny them of any tools that they would need to further their education is just a major sin. It's just a total sin, I think. And putting my economic development authority hat on, I'm still curious as to when does Humpty Dumpty fall off the wall for this new high school? How long do we have really to make preparations to get this thing going? Because I think a lot of concern in the community is it's going to happen tomorrow, it's going to happen tomorrow, or it's going to cost. I mean, I've not seen any real concrete planning for this new high school, and I'm wondering, is that in the books, or is that going to happen soon?
And may I just tack on to that, because I think it's kind of relevant. The other kind of group of questions that we had, I don't know if Mr. Johnson, if yours would be in this line too, but was about kind of communication from the schools and the challenges thereof. And there was one writer who said, you know, more people would, you know, the problem is there's not enough communication in wide enough groups, so people attack before they have the facts and everybody gets sidetracked. And what we really need is a process where there can be taxpayer input into the process before things are finalized, Allison, as you were kind of mentioning, but where people really have wide access to the facts. And I know you all are doing many, many presentations, but I'm just wondering if you can comment on, are there some other maybe new innovative ways we could engage and inform?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of ways. I mean, there are a lot of sources of news in Falls Church. The question is, who's communicating how? What are they deriving from where? We're working on developing a clearer picture of that, and we're also asking people, what would you like to know more about, and what would be the best way to get that information to you? And if you want to just go ahead and send something in to me about that, happy to take that bit of information. But I think with respect to that, one of the other problems I think we may have is over-communication, too much. You know, there's so much information out there that a lot of times people will say, well, you didn't tell me about this, and well, actually there was a notice about this, but how you sort out getting the right information to the right person at the right time. I'm sure if we've all looked at our email boxes lately, there are a lot of emails that eventually you miss, or it's like, I don't remember getting that, or I haven't even checked this account recently. So getting that right balance of getting the content to people in a way that's actionable and timely and targeted to them is not easy. I think we do put out a great amount of information, but you know, sometimes it's finding it that's the problem. But we're actively looking to find more and better ways to communicate. So, and we're all ears in terms of what that should be. Electronic communication is obviously easier and less expensive. You know, the days of hard copy newsletters and whatnot have maybe passed, but maybe we should supplement as well. Maybe there are people that we can only reach that way. But one of the things we need to know more is what does work best for people. Should we be doing more discrete pages? Should we do RSS feeds? What should we be doing? And you know, it's not, there's no lack of information, it's just a sorting and aggregation factor. As soon as we hear from the community about that, we'll take steps to remedy that or to enhance it.
You're doing it on GMMEH.
Oh, and on GMMEH, you know, the steering committee has been working on this process and continues to work on it. There was an RFP that recently went out to seek some expertise that will help guide the planning communication and visioning going forward. We look forward in the spring probably to have a community visioning. And you know, one of the things that I think is going to be absolutely vital to the future viability of that project is getting a clear sense and consensus on what people want, what balances they want to strike, what trade-offs they want to make, because a lot of people, and I would just commend Susan Carney, especially for all of the hard work she's done to push this and to get us where we are, and to have the vision for making the inclusion of that parcel in the city limits a real game changer in terms of what we can do for development. And it's not just a question of, is there a way to get an improved school on that site and develop it, but what will that mean for the larger city? I think that could be a real catalyst for development throughout that entire part of the city, but I think it has to be done with some degree of care, because A, you got to get it right, and B, it's going to take a lot of discussion so that people, I think the Falls Church Way will call for having the socialization of this issue be pretty substantial. I think we're laying the groundwork for that. You should be seeing the fruits of that begin in the spring, and I think it'll be a steady process of additional work. I don't think there will be completion of this next year, but we're pedaling as fast as we can.
How long do we have, though, to really get things going? Is there any perception of that? I mean,
well, I'll just say this, and Dr. Jones can elaborate, but this is kind of how much longer, and I asked myself this question a lot, how much longer can we drive our 2004 Sienna minivan before something really goes sideways? Last year there was an awards assembly at the high school where in the midst of this rather solemn ceremony, there was a trash can on the stage to collect the leaking rainwater coming through the roof. I think it's how long can that school hold together before it needs a big infusion of cash that could not be recovered. Be it the HVAC, which wouldn't have a lot of components that could be repurposed because a lot of it would be ductwork, or a new roof, or any of those things. So to some extent, it's a race against time with an unknown of a several million or potentially eye-watering millions of money needed to keep George Mason operational. So, Dr. Jones, I don't know if you want to hazard be an actuary for George Mason, but and the other thing is I've said frequently that we've known for 60 years that George Mason will be 60 years old by now. It's not getting any younger, and we do need to maintain a tempo on this that will enable us to act as swiftly as possible.
I just want to make sure, Mr. Johnson, I think you did have your hand up there. If you did, I want to make sure you had your chance. No. Okay, great. So.
I have a comment.
Yes, Harry. And we're just about out of time, but we have time for one more.
Very quickly, a fact about George Mason that I don't think there's any other building in Northern Virginia that has 90 exterior doors. It's a security, an absolute security nightmare. When I told my wife that, she didn't believe me. She got a job with the system as a night supervisor. So she walked around and she counted them all and came home and said, "Do you know there are 90 exterior doors?" Okay, and that's just one factor involved. So the security issue with George Mason. And then I'm just gonna do a couple more things. 30% factor. Okay, we talked about going with Fairfax, going with Arlington. How many young families could afford to have a 30% drop in the value of their houses? Okay, I mean that's just a round figure about basically the cost of homes. Number two, the quickness at which homes sell in the city of Falls Church. That's also another factor. During Tom and Hunter's time up at the middle and high school, a gentleman by the name of Dr. George Tomes, who was principal of the school, and of course he's received 0 credit for this. He proclaimed at a faculty meeting in 1976 that in order for the Falls Church City school system to exist, we had to be better and different. And he says, any staff member here at this meeting who doesn't want to get on the bus to make this system different and better, then they need to go somewhere else. And it took about 7 or 8 years to change the culture of the school system in the city of Falls Church at that time. And he was a primary mover in that direction. Of course, we had Dr. Pace and the school board and everybody else. But George Tomes really came up with that idea. And he teaches at the UVA Center 1 or 2 nights a week, so he's still around. But there are so many factors involved, and Tony, I'm amazed that she did not go to George Mason. She did not grow up in Northern Virginia, and she has been an excellent student of the school system. I keep on trying to catch her in a mistake, but she hasn't said anything incorrect yet. All right, like I said, my 43. I'm dyslexic. 43 budgets. There hasn't been an easy time in any one of those 43.
So I think that's about it, folks, unless there are other comments and questions tonight. I think, thank you, Tony, and thank you, Justin, for coming tonight. It really is a pleasure to have you here. And on behalf of the community forum partners, the civic organizations that put this on, I really appreciate you coming and being willing to face the audience, face the questions, and thank you all for being here tonight as well. Thanks so much.